I am Fredrik Ericsson, a ski mountaineer from Sweden, living in Chamonix, France.
We're at the Alpine Club of Pakistan, and they're going to ask us a few questions to make sure that we are qualified to go up and achieve our objective.
Succeed in achieving your goal, that is to climb K2.
I agree with you.
It was August 6th, 2010, and Fredrik Ericsson had no idea it would be his last day on Earth. Imagine standing at 27,000 feet above sea level on K2, the world's second highest mountain. The air is so thin that your lungs burn with each breath. The temperature hovers around negative 40 degrees. Your brain is swelling from oxygen deprivation. Your blood is thickening to the consistency of ketchup, and you're staring down a near vertical ice corridor with a massive, unstable glacier hanging directly above your head. You click into a pair of ski bindings and point those skis downhill in that crazy, dangerous terrain, where a tiny mistake is the difference between life and death. Today, I'm covering one of the most ambitious and fatal mountain attempts in human history. The story of a man who tried to ski down a mountain so dangerous it kills 1 in every 4 people who simply try to climb it. The chain of fateful choices that led him to that moment, and the shocking outcome that nobody saw coming. What I discovered about Fredrik's final decision will make you question everything you thought you knew about risk. Welcome to the extreme edge. There's an invisible line on every mountain on Earth. It sits at approximately 26,000 feet above sea level. Above this line, the human body begins to die. Literally die. Your cells start shutting down. Your cognitive functions diminish. Your digestive system stops working. Every minute spent above this death zone is a minute stolen from the edge of mortality. Most people, even experienced mountaineers, spend as little time as possible in the death zone. They climb through it quickly, reach their summit, and descend the way they came, by climbing carefully down. But Fredrik Ericsson wasn't like most people. Fredrik Ericsson was born on March 14, 1975, in Sundsvall, Sweden, and grew up in the northern city of Umeå, a landscape of forests and modest hills rather than true mountains. Like many Swedish children, he learned to ski at an early age, but unlike his peers, Fredrik developed an almost supernatural relationship with gravity and snow. By his 20s, he had abandoned groomed slopes for virgin powder on the highest peaks he could find. When most skiers were content tackling slopes in the Alps or Rockies, Fredrik set his sights exponentially higher. He dreamed of skiing where no human had ever skied before, from the summits of the world's 14 26,000-foot peaks, all of which pierce deep into the death zone. By 2010, he had already put skis on 4 Himalayan giants: Shishapangma in 2004, Gasherbrum 2 in 2005, a near success on Lila Peak earlier in 2005, where he turned back just 500 feet below the summit, and a partial descent of Dhaulagiri in 2007. Each run fed his ultimate ambition: to be the first person to ski from the summit of K2. But there's a saying among mountaineers: Everest is a walk, K2 is a climb. Not to downplay the dangers of Everest from the comfort of my home. K2 stands 28,251 feet tall, making it second only to Everest in height. But height isn't what makes K2 deadly. It's the mountain's perfect storm of dangers. Unlike most mountains that get progressively steeper toward the top, K2 is relentlessly steep from bottom to top. At 45 degrees, its slopes are sharper than most expert ski runs at resorts. While on a ski slope, these would be marked as extreme terrain. On K2, the slopes are covered with ice, rocks, and crevasses, with drops of thousands of feet awaiting any misstep. And then there are the unpredictable weather patterns that can trap climbers for days. To make things worse, its remote location in the Karakoram range between Pakistan and China makes rescue virtually impossible. Tiny detour on this chaos train. If you want more raw, uncut stories we can't show here, come join the extreme community on Patreon. We'll see you on the real extreme edge. The history of summiting K2 is written in tragedy. The first American expedition in 1938 ended in retreat after multiple close calls. The first successful summit didn't come until 1954, and even then, only 2 of the 11 Italian expedition members reached the top. In 1986, in what became known as the Black Summer, 13 climbers died in a single season, and yet, through all these decades of triumph and tragedy, no one had successfully skied from the summit of K2. Many had dismissed the idea as suicidal, but Fredrik Ericsson wasn't like most people. To understand why Fredrik chose to do this, place yourself in his mind for a moment. You've already accomplished what few humans ever will. You've stood atop mountains where the air is so thin that most people would lose consciousness within hours. You've pointed your ski tips down slopes where any fall means certain death. And you've survived without a scratch. With each success, your confidence grows. The impossible starts to seem possible. The line between audacious and reckless begins to blur. This is the mental state that experts in extreme sports psychology call the expert trap. When past successes create a dangerous sense of invulnerability. It's not arrogance exactly, but a recalibration of what feels dangerous. Risks that would terrify most people begin to feel manageable. In 2009, Fredrik made his first attempt at K2 with Italian mountaineer Michele Fait. Picture these two arriving at base camp, pumped up, excited, living their dream. They're even writing about their adventure for Powder magazine, sharing their journey with the world. Fredrik was so confident, he actually wrote something that'll send chills down your spine when you hear what happened next. He said, "The drive through the waterfall to get here was probably more scary than anything we'll face on K2. Scarier than anything they would face on K2. Those words would come back to haunt him in the worst possible way. At first, everything was going great. They made their way up to their first camp at nearly 20,000 feet, navigating the massive maze of ice towers and hidden cracks that could swallow a person whole. A week later, they pushed up to their second camp, climbing slopes so steep they had to fix ropes just to move safely. Even the weather was playing nice. K2 is infamous for its deadly storms, but the mountain was calm, almost as if it was luring them in. Then came the day that would change everything. When you climb mountains this high, you can't just go straight to the top. Your body would shut down from the lack of oxygen. You have to acclimatize, climb high, sleep low, teaching your body to survive with less oxygen. So the two climbers were doing exactly that, and they decided to test the snow conditions by skiing down from Camp 2 back to base camp. Now picture it if you can. Michele Fait, an elite climber with multiple 26,000-foot peaks under his belt, was skiing down a slope that was tilted at 50 degrees. That was steeper than almost anything you'd find at a ski resort. The surface beneath his skis was a mix of snow and ice. Then, in an instant, everything went wrong. Fait caught an edge of his ski. That is, the metal side of his ski blade snagged on the ice instead of gliding over it. On a normal ski slope, this would have just meant a tumble, maybe a bruised ego, and a sore body. He would have slid a bit, self-arrested, dusted himself off, and continued down. But on K2 slopes, it was a death sentence. Fredrik could only watch in horror as his friend tumbled down the mountain face. Imagine seeing someone you cared about bouncing off rocks, picking up speed, completely helpless. Fait fell 3,000 feet. That was like falling from a 300-story building. His body finally came to rest on a small snow plateau far below. Fredrik immediately started making his way down to his friend. It took him 20 minutes of insanely dangerous solo descent to reach Fate's body. When he got there, the reality was unbearable. Fate's skull had been crushed from hitting a rock. His friend and climbing partner was gone, just like that. But here's where this story takes a turn that'll really make you question the human mind. Despite the risks, Fredrik stayed on that same deadly slope for hours. He used his ice axe to dig a makeshift grave, covering Fate's body with snow and rocks. The whole time he was doing this, he was exposed to the exact same dangers that had just claimed his friend's life. Now, for most people, if you watched your friend die attempting something you were both there for, you'd probably pack up. Most would take this as the universe screaming at them to go home, to abandon the dream, to choose life over ambition. Everyone at base camp assumed Fredrik would leave. Who wouldn't? But there's something different about people like Fredrik. Their brains literally work differently from ours. Scientists have done MRI scans on extreme athletes, and they found something fascinating. These people have reduced activity in the amygdala, which is the fear center of your brain. At the same time, they have increased activity in the parts that process rewards. When you and I see danger, they see a challenge. When you and I feel fear, they feel laser focused. After 2 days alone in his tent, mourning his friend, Fredrik emerged and announced something that shocked everyone at base camp. He wasn't giving up. He was coming back next year to try again. This wasn't disrespectful to his friend's memory. In Fredrik's mind, it was almost a tribute. The dream they shared wouldn't die on that mountain, even if Michele had. As the summer of 2010 rolled around, Fredrik was back at K2's base camp. This time around, Fredrik had a new partner, Austrian mountaineer Gerlinde Kaltenbrunner. And Gerlinde wasn't just any climber. She was one of the strongest female high-altitude climbers in history, pursuing her own incredible dream, becoming the first woman to climb all 14 26,000-foot peaks without using supplemental oxygen. By 2010, she'd already knocked off 12 of these monsters. She only needed K2 and Broad Peak to complete her historic quest. Gerlinde was exactly who Fredrik needed by his side. Technically skilled, mentally tough as nails, and completely committed to climbing without bottled oxygen. See, many high-altitude climbers use artificial oxygen to fight off the death zone's effects. Not these two. They believed in facing the mountain in its purest form, with no technological crutches. This purist approach cranked up the risk factor significantly, but it aligned perfectly with their shared mountaineering philosophy. If you're going to dance with the devil, you might as well look him in the eye. The 2010 climbing season had been nothing short of miserable. A stubborn weather pattern had been hammering the Karakoram range, sending storm after storm rolling in and dumping feet of unstable snow across K2's upper slopes. Teams had been stuck at base camp for weeks, waiting for a break that never seemed to come. Several expeditions had already thrown in the towel, unwilling to play this waiting game any longer. By early August, the situation was getting desperate. The climbing window was rapidly closing, with monsoon season lurking just around the corner. Before those predictable daily storms arrived with the monsoon, there might be just one brief window of stable weather, perhaps as short as a single day. 24 hours to achieve what most people couldn't do in perfect conditions with unlimited time. By August 5th, Fredrik, Gerlinde, an American climber named Trey Cook, along with 6 other mountaineers, had somehow pushed through all of this. They reached Camp 4 at 26,000 feet and just below the summit after days of battling through deep snow that sometimes swallowed them to their waists with each step. From their position, only about 2,200 vertical feet remained to the summit, but those would be the most dangerous 2,200 feet of their lives. The weather forecast was ambiguous at best. Some suggested conditions might improve overnight, though storm clouds were gathering. 6 other climbers at Camp 4 decided to wait another day, even if this meant they would never summit K2. And Fredrik, Gerlinde, and Trey found themselves staring down one of those life-defining decisions. Wait for potentially better weather, or seize what might be their only opportunity. Now, I want you to put yourself in that tent at 26,000 feet for a minute. Your body is literally dying in the thin air. Each breath feels insufficient, like you're trying to suck oxygen through a coffee straw. You've invested years of training for this moment, tens of thousands of dollars, countless hours of suffering, and now you're here, so close to your goal, you can almost taste it. The forecast gives you just a sliver of hope. Conditions might improve. 6 other climbers with the same information decided it was too risky. What would you do? Fredrik decided to go for it. Despite conditions starting to deteriorate around 11 p.m., with winds picking up and visibility dropping, they committed to their summit push, and that single decision would seal his fate. At 1:30 a.m. on August 6th, while those other climbers remained zipped and safe in their tents, Fredrik, Garlande, and Trey stepped out into a cold so bitter it felt alive. Their headlamps cut weak yellow cones through the darkness, barely illuminating the next few feet of terrain. The temperature was cold enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes, and looming above them in the darkness was the most technical, most feared section of the entire mountain, the notorious bottleneck. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what the bottleneck is. It's a narrow gully of near-vertical ice, approximately 300 feet high, with slopes approaching 80 degrees in places. It's essentially a natural funnel on the mountain that forces climbers into a confined space where they're exposed to multiple hazards simultaneously. The gully itself is challenging enough. Technical ice climbing at 27,000 feet requires tremendous skill and stamina. Each swing of an ice axe, each kick of a crampon at these heights demands precious oxygen that the brain and heart desperately need. Some climbers report that a single section that might take 30 minutes to climb at lower elevations requires 2 hours or more in the death zone. But what makes the bottleneck truly terrifying is what hangs directly above it. A hanging glacier the size of several buildings that can break off without warning, sending tons of ice crashing down through the gully. This sérac, estimated to weigh thousands of tons, is held in place by physics that are constantly changing as the glacier shifts, warms, and cracks. It's like climbing inside the barrel of a loaded gun. Just 2 years earlier, in the worst disaster in K2's history, an ice collapse from this same sérac had killed 11 climbers in a single day. During the 2008 climbing season, a section of the sérac had broken free while numerous teams were attempting to descend from the summit. The falling ice swept away the fixed ropes that climbers were using to rappel, leaving many stranded without a way down. Some fell to their deaths immediately. Others succumbed to exposure after being trapped on the mountain for days. Fredrik, Garlande, and Trey knew this history well. Every climber on K2 knows the stories of the 2008 disaster, but they also knew that the most dangerous place to be near a sérac is directly underneath it. And the only way to minimize that risk is to move through the bottleneck as quickly as possible. At 7 a.m., after 5.5 hours of climbing through these nightmarish conditions, Trey had seen enough. The combination of extreme cold, visibility so poor they could barely see each other, and complete exhaustion convinced him the risk simply wasn't worth taking. He made the difficult decision to turn back. Fredrik and Garlande continued upward. This was Fredrik's second critical decision, choosing to continue when one of his climbing partners turned back. In mountaineering, when someone in your team decides conditions are too dangerous, it's like a red flag shooting up. It's a warning sign that demands attention. Trey Cook wasn't some amateur. He was an experienced mountaineer. Fredrik pressed on anyway. But the most fateful decision was yet to come. As they approached the bottleneck, Fredrik faced a choice about how to protect himself on the most dangerous section of the climb. Standard practice would be to use a rope between climbers, providing a lifeline in case of a slip, but ropes slow you down. And in the death zone, speed sometimes equals safety. The less time spent at extreme altitude, the better your chances of survival. Fredrik chose to climb unroped through the bottleneck. He would go first, with Garlande following behind. There's one more factor you should know about Fredrik's situation. Unlike most climbers attempting K2, he wasn't just carrying climbing gear. He had ski equipment strapped to his back. Those extra pounds might not seem like much when you're standing on solid ground, but at 27,000 feet, where just taking a single step can leave you gasping, that added weight is like carrying a small child on your back. It affects everything: your balance, your endurance, your ability to react quickly if something goes wrong. Fredrik moved ahead into the bottleneck, his crampons biting into what appeared to be stable snow. The visibility was poor, with clouds wrapping around them, occasionally allowing brief glimpses of the terrain ahead. He was attempting to place a piton, a metal spike you hammer into the ice to create an anchor point on a small outcrop to the right of the main gully. As he worked, standing in seemingly deep snow, the surface beneath him suddenly gave way. On slopes this sharp, what happens next is pure, cold, unforgiving physics. The snow had been concealing a layer of hard, slick ice. Without warning, Fredrik's footing collapsed. There was no rope to catch him, no second chance. In an instant, he was sliding, then tumbling, picking up speed with every foot of elevation lost. At approximately 8:10 a.m., Garlande's panicked voice broke through on the radio. Her words sent chills through base camp. Fredrik had fallen. She could only watch helplessly as her climbing partner accelerated down the mountain, disappearing into the clouds below. I want you to try to imagine, just for a second, what that moment must have been like for her. The absolute horror of watching someone you know, someone you've trusted your life to, suddenly vanish before your eyes. 1 second they're there, the next, gone. And knowing with absolute certainty what that disappearance means on a mountain like K2. Garlande immediately began descending, her movements frantic yet careful, searching desperately for any trace of Fredrik. All she managed to find was a single ski that had torn away during his violent fall, now lying alone on the slope like some grim marker. As she picked her way down through worsening conditions, she ran into 2 other climbers who had started up from Camp 4, Derek Zalewski from Poland and Fabrizio Zangrilli from the United States. The 3 of them made their way back to the relative safety of Camp 4 together, their silence heavier than any words could be. While this was happening, a Russian climber named Yura Ermachek had made his way down toward Camp 3 and positioned himself to scan the vast exposed flank that fell away from the climbing route. Through momentary breaks in the clouds, he spotted something that confirmed their worst fears. There, approximately 1,300 feet above Camp 3, lay Fredrik's body. Even to these hardened mountaineers who lived in a world where death was a constant companion, the situation was brutally clear. Recovery would be impossible. The entire face was a death trap of avalanche risk. Anyone attempting to reach Fredrik would likely join him in eternity. The mountain wasn't finished taking lives. It was just waiting for its next victim. After tense radio consultations that bounced between camps and eventually reached all the way to Fredrik's father, a heart-wrenching decision was made. Fredrik would stay where he fell, forever becoming part of the mountain he had dreamed of conquering. His final resting place had a view onto his favorite mountains, as one climber later described it, a small mercy in an otherwise merciless situation. Here's the cruel, twisted irony of it all. Fredrik fell while climbing, never getting the chance to use the very skis he had carried all the way up the mountain. Those skis had added weight and altered his balance. Those skis that represented the dream that had pulled him back to K2, even after he'd watched his previous partner die on these same slopes. That dream would remain unfulfilled, hanging in the thin air like a ghost. When we pull back and look at what really happened that day, several things stand out, like warning signs that only become clear when it's too late to heed them. But none of this means Fredrik was reckless or foolish. Everyone who knew him described him as methodical, careful, and experienced. What happened to Fredrik could have happened to any climber on K2 that day. At that altitude, in those conditions, the line between making it home to tell your story and becoming part of the mountain forever can be as thin as a single snowflake. In the years since Fredrik's death, only one person has successfully accomplished what he set out to do. In 2018, Polish climber Andrzej Bargiel became the first person to ski from the summit of K2 all the way down. And in a way, Fredrik's attempt, despite its tragic end, helped make this possible. Bargiel studied Fredrik's route and approach, learning both from his innovations and his fatal mistakes. That's often how progress works in the world of extreme adventure. The pioneers who push the boundaries further than anyone before sometimes pay the ultimate price, but their attempts inspire others to follow, to learn from their mistakes, to succeed where they fell short. Fredrik Ericsson's story isn't just about a man who died on a mountain. It's about that invisible line that separates courage from catastrophe. It's about the human drive to push beyond what seems possible, to risk everything for a dream that most would consider insane. So what drives people like Fredrik? What makes someone return to a mountain that already killed their friend? Is it obsession, passion, or something else entirely that most of us will never understand? Now, I don't know the answers, but I do know that somewhere on K2, Fredrik Ericsson remains forever part of the mountain he loved. And maybe that's exactly where he was meant to be. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay bold and live brave.